Today we're going to be covering one of the most heartbreaking inquiries I tend to run across on this YouTube channel, and that's basically a situation where your ex broke up with you, threw you away feeling like a piece of garbage, and leaving you wondering if your time meant anything to them. So, in my opinion, it's rare to actually encounter a situation where you truly, quote-unquote, meant nothing to an ex. Though, it is possible, and that's really what I want this YouTube video to be looking at. Those types of situations where it's likely that you meant nothing. Additionally, I'd also like to spend some time diving into the psychology of why they're acting like you meant nothing to them when you really did mean something to them. So essentially what we have here is two portions to this video. The first one, we're going to be creating a scenario where it's much more likely that you quote unquote meant nothing to your ex. And the second division of the video is going to be looking at those situations where your ex is posturing, where they're pretending like you meant nothing to them when you really did, and looking at the psychology of that. So let's just jump right in. So first off, what is the likelihood that you really meant nothing to your ex? Now, I've already gone on record stating that I think it's actually pretty rare where you can find yourself in a situation where you meant nothing to an ex. So the vast majority of people listening to this or watching this should probably skip to the part of the video where I dissect the psychology behind why your ex is making you think you meant nothing to them. But if you're interested in, or you're just very concerned because you feel like you are in a situation where you meant nothing to your ex, I'm going to try to create the perfect circumstance in which your ex would think you meant nothing to them. And in my opinion, there are only a handful of situations that I think you encounter where this actually occurs. Number one is you haven't dated for very long. Number two is they are a complete narcissist. Number three is they were just using you for a green card, which is illegal. And number four is your time together was basically only a one-night stand. So let's take a moment and talk about each of these scenarios a little bit in depth so you can get kind of an understanding of what comprises each of these. So for example, you haven't dated for very long. Now, most people will freak out when hearing this, but I'm here to tell you that most of you can rest easy. When I say I'm looking for a situation in which you haven't dated for very long, I'm literally talking about a situation where you've dated your ex for like 2 weeks total. Yes, even 1 month summer fling type relationships means something to the vast majority of people out there. But one in which you dated maybe for a week, that creates an environment where they may not have much care because they haven't really invested a lot of emotional connection into that relationship to make them care. Let's move on to the most likely situation in which your ex would not care, which is they are a complete narcissist. Keyword there is complete. So your ex is considered a complete narcissist, meaning they hit all of the following criteria. Number one, they have a grandiose sense of self. Number two, they live in this fantasy world to prop up their ego. Number three, they need constant praise and attention. Number four, they have a sense of entitlement. Number five, they exploit others without any feeling of guilt. And number six, they intimidate and bully others. Now, most of our clients will go on record and say that they think their exes are narcissists, but most of my clients are wrong. It's entirely possible for a non-narcissistic person to seek praise and attention. As an example, anxious individuals often do this. What I'm looking for here is an ex that runs the gamut of behaviors. So if your ex is the extreme level of narcissist, then it's possible that your relationship existed for them to prop up their sense of self. So I want you to be on the lookout for scenarios like that. Essentially one in which the only value of the relationship was simply by being with you, not about establishing a connection with you. Let's move on to the green card situation. So first off, this is completely illegal, and the reason I include it here is because we have seen it happen before in our coaching practice. And unfortunately, it's never an easy situation. Often our clients, they'll come begging to us for help to help them fix this relationship to try to win their exes back, but we found that almost always clients in a scenario are better off moving on. And it's complicated because often these individuals are married or going through a divorce or separation. So there's not an easy out necessarily, and it's also sometimes a hard pill to swallow. Usually circumstantially, you will figure out if you're in this circumstance, basically, if you're married from someone and they got their green card as a result, they potentially run the risk of this. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you meant nothing to them. That's where it gets kind of in this difficult gray area to figure out. My advice is if you're finding yourself in a situation like this, you should seek out a lawyer, someone who has legal understanding of the situation on how you should handle it. Because my concern isn't your ex's well-being. My concern is your well-being. And then finally, we have your time together was basically a one-night stand. So if that is literally all you shared with this person, and this person has a history of one-night stands, do you see where I'm going with this?
Real quick, I want to say that if you're new to this YouTube channel or you're trying to figure out what you should be doing to get your ex back and you're trying to learn if you even have a chance in your specific circumstance, probably the smartest thing for you to do is actually stop by our website, www.exboyfriendrecovery.com, or take our Ex Recovery Chances quiz that can be found at exboyfriendrecovery.com. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, taking that free quiz is super easy to do. All you have to simply do is look in the description link below this YouTube video and click on the link you see there. It will take you directly to the quiz where you can fill it out and get an easy answer on what you should be doing going forward and overall what your chances look like in your specific situation. All right, so let's get you back to the video.
All right, let's move on to more psychological based situations, because to me, the more interesting question isn't necessarily, hey, what is the likelihood that I really meant nothing to them? Like 95% of situations you meant something to your ex. To me, the more interesting question is, what is going on in an ex's head if they are acting like you meant nothing to them when you really did? This is where things have a tendency to get complicated. There's a misunderstanding I think that most people have when looking at scenarios where they think their ex meant nothing to them or they meant nothing to their ex. And I'm reminded of the old adage, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. Because to me, that's the key component to understand. So I want to take a look at specific things an ex does to make you think that you meant nothing to them. And generally speaking, the meant nothing behaviors fall into three distinct categories. Number one is they're rude to you after the breakup. Number two is they block you after the breakup. And number three is they start dating someone new. But what's interesting is that two of the three behaviors have nothing to do with indifference. Only one does. Now, what does this tell us? Well, let's just go through each behavior really quickly and try to understand it on a psychological level before I open up that can of worms. So, number one, your ex is being rude to you after the breakup. This is usually reserved for exes who call you names, spread rumors about you to mutual friends, fight with you when you get back in touch with them, these kind of exes. So usually their intent of being rude to you is almost always to put the pain back onto you. After all, breakups hurt, and it's easier to deflect blame and point fingers than to take ownership or even move on. So if you think about it logically, anytime you get angry about something, it means that on the opposite end, there's something that you care enough to get angry about. And that's kind of why I think exes who are rude or mean or get angry still care about you. Because if they didn't care about you, they'd be indifferent to you. They wouldn't care enough to argue with you. They'd just simply move on. But what about situations where they start dating someone new? So many will point to the fact that exes, when they're dating someone new, it's proof that they meant nothing to their ex. And it's a tough one. I definitely see the argument, but here's what our research suggests. The more quickly an ex moves on from you after a breakup, the more likely they are trying to avoid the overwhelm that comes with that breakup by distracting themselves with someone else. Not exactly the most morally sound approach to dating, but it is something we see quite often. And in this case, I think your ex cares a great deal to the point that they're using someone else to mask their pain, which will end up getting them caught in this self-fulfilling cycle where they're on these consistent, distract type relationships. So they're always going on the rebound. Now, one last thing I want to make a point on here is timing is really what matters. So if you're looking at an ex of yours from 5 years ago, this concept doesn't really apply. We're looking at recency of breakup. So if you broke up with them recently or they broke up with you recently and they moved on to someone else very quickly, then it's as weird as it sounds and as much as it feels like you meant nothing to them, because why would they do this to you? I think you need to understand that they're using this person to mask the pain so they don't have to deal with the grief that often is associated with breakups. And that leads us to the next thing, which is they block you after a breakup. So I've talked about this on my website, on this YouTube channel, on the podcast multiple times. And really, here's the big thing you need to understand about blocking. The most important job you have is to figure out what type of block you have encountered. So there's two types of blocks. There's the soft block and the hard block. The soft block means you are blocked pretty much everywhere important, but still have some avenue of communicating with them. So the most important way in which we communicate is usually through our smartphones, but those situations sometimes you can be blocked on a smartphone, but you can also contact them on Facebook Messenger or Instagram DM or Snapchat. You're not blocked there. That's like considered a soft block. So you're blocked in one area, but you have other areas of communicating with them. The hard block is the opposite. Basically, you're blocked everywhere imaginable. The only way to get in touch with them is, I even think email should be included here. So, usually, when I say included, I mean the opposite of probably what it sounded like I meant. Usually, if you're on a hard block, the only way for you to communicate with them is through like email or through writing an actual letter and showing up and trying to surprise them. That's considered a hard block. And the vast majority of blocking situations, though, we find that by simply you doing nothing and waiting, you'll get unblocked at some point. And it's hard to take on faith. But we feel very confident about this because we've been doing this for close to 10 years and have seen it so many times. 70% of situations in which you are blocked, either soft or hard, you'll get unblocked in the span of like 3 months. Now, there are some situations where you don't get unblocked, 30%. They're just simply moving on. And in these rare circumstances, then it's likely that your ex wants to move on from you and you'll have no avenue to rebuild rapport. Now, I'm talking about extremes, like you've exhausted every avenue of communicating with them, nothing has worked. At that point, it's time to focus your energies on moving on, which may not be what you want to do in the moment, but that's the best thing for you in the long run. So if that's the case, though, where I would say it's more likely you could have meant nothing to your ex, but even in a full-out block, I'm going to argue that you still meant something. So a lot of times if you're in a hard block, people will make the argument, well, that's proof that I meant nothing to my ex. Look, they haven't unblocked me. But I think you can easily make an argument that dealing with you and your relationship caused them so much pain because they opened up, they were vulnerable, they cared so much that they're scared of getting hurt again. Is that truly them not caring? I'm not sure. It's more of a philosophical conflict at that point. All right, so what I think I really want to sum up everything here is intent matters when it comes to learning if you meant nothing. Here's the last point I want to leave you with. I think that intent is what matters most when determining if your time together with your ex meant something to them. So if they intended to use you in either way, physically as a one-night stand or emotionally as an extreme narcissist, then I think a real argument can be made that you meant nothing. But in my decade of research at ex-boyfriend recovery, ex-girlfriend recovery, exboyfriend.com, marriage recovery, most of the clients that have come through our doors claiming that they're worried their time with their ex meant nothing to their ex, they're simply mistaken because they aren't seeing the negative behaviors from their ex for what they really are. Momentary lapses in frustration because their ex is too hurt to be an adult.